The recording team and translators. Now that we start, let's make a cut because we want to put this recording as a capsule in LinkedIn and YouTube for Mexico's purposes. So please encapsulate this as of now, and this is going to be a segment apart. So we're going to translate this fiscal panel. So this is to ask about the economic panel sent by Mexico to the Congress of the Union. It has some changes, but we will see. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, Francisco Betancourt, Chairman of the Fiscal Council, Francisco Valencia, Legal Committee, Marco Castillo, expert in transfer prices, Roberto Colin from the Tax Committee, Juan Carlos Hernández, member of the Tax Committee, Juan Antonio Castro, member of the Legal Committee, International Affairs. We give the floor to Francisco. He's going to ask questions to each one of them. Again, my pleasure to be with you as members of the Tax Committee in Mexico. We hope to cover the needs of all our customers since 2014 changes due to reforms. First of all, I would like to mention in the company of my colleagues that we have worked to provide quality information so you know how to tackle these new tax reforms. In September 2016, a new economic package is presented, and this is according to economic adversity. Because Mexico is experiencing some changes, now we have an exchange rate exceeding 20 pesos, and we had strong drops in oil prices, and this causes that economic reforms increase in 0.5% collection by our government. What shall we expect from these tax reforms? They are part of the structural reforms that have been promoted in the last administration. We expect to keep a 3% inflation rate. As you know, Mexico has had very low inflation levels, between 3 and 5%. This year, our inflation rate was 0.7%, so we're expecting a 3% inflation rate, an increase of 3 points in GDP, and we're talking about between 2 and 3 points, 2.5 to summarize. The exchange rate will drop from 20 pesos, which is now, to 18.20 pesos. That's peso US dollar. And we also expect that all these structural fiscal reforms benefit foreign investment through fiscal incentives. So to answer all these questions, I will give the floor to our colleagues, and they will talk about some of these specific topics. Let's start with Francisco Valencia. Paco, what are we expecting in the oil sector with this new fiscal reform? Thank you. In the area of hydrocarbons, as you well mentioned, there was an important drop in oil prices. So forecasts for 2017 were changed. They are estimating a drop in income of about 13%. This will cause that tax authorities will have to exert their corroboration powers to counterbalance this lack of income due to oil prices. So income tax will be having a strong emphasis in 2017 because in 2017 exercise the estimated price will be $42 US, very far from 2012 that was above $100 US. Another important point in energy matters, as a result of the reform 2 years ago, in 2017, gasoline prices will be released. It was expected that this was going to take place in 2018, but this will be implemented because they want to eradicate the subsidy to gasoline. Another important point is that in income tax, they need to establish a reform. So no accumulation of payments in kind made to contractors that have shared production. It will be allowed not to accumulate this income as long as this is not deducted at the time when they buy it or sell it. Another point is that as a result of the energy reform, the income tax law was not updated in the area of investment. So the state had the transformation storing of hydrocarbons, these assets that will be used by the private sector were outside the deduction of income tax, and they will be incorporated for 2017. Thank you very much. Now we're going to ask a question to Alfonso Castro. We want to know in the tax code of the Federation which changes we have, which are the new obligations for taxpayers, and what are we expecting from electronic audits that will be implemented soon. The reform for this fiscal year proposes some adjustments to electronic revisions as a result of some precedents by the Supreme Court suggesting or criticizing the pre-settlements. The big change is that these settlements will become definite only if after the term taxpayers are not offering arguments or evidence to inarticulate these accusations. 2 years ago, or currently, pre-settlements by themselves became an act, a definite act. So this is an important adjustment, especially now when we have electronic audits that are being implemented. Yes, thank you very much. And taking advantage of your experience as a lawyer, you know that currently the scenario in Mexico is not certain. What can you tell us about the resolutions that were issued against the reform of 2015? As you said, in Mexico, as a result of 2014 reform, there were many amparo writs that were raised, or writs of injunction against electronic accounting and all the electronic system introduced since 2014. These resolutions have tried to support all the law mechanisms so authorities may implement them, and electronic accounting or electronic audits will be implemented. This mechanism will work, has to work, Recently, well, last week we had some news that were also very important. The court supports the constitutionality of the social welfare limits. So companies will only deduct half of these benefits. This will have very important costs in the fiscal area. So we need to analyze this now. Thank you very much. Thanks for your answer. Now let's turn to Roberto, public accountant. We would like to know which are the reforms for 2017 in the area of income taxes. Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. The tax reform in the economic package for 2017 grants some benefits to taxpayers, and it will also implement control measures for them. Let's start with authorizing donors. We have some flexibility aspects, as in the case of not considering recovery quotas to determine the percentage if they do not exceed 10% in income, different to the social purpose of donors that should be taxed by the income tax. And in the benefit framework, it is also considered that these donors could have access to a certification process of 3 levels that will give them the possibility to access some benefits, tax benefits, and have some administrative facilities. Now, talking about control measures. Some assumptions are established. If the donor enters into a bankruptcy process, they will have to hand out their assets to another authorized donor. The lack of authorization to receive donations, and if the authorization is revoked, it will not be renewed. Another assumption also considered for a bankruptcy process is asset transfer, and the authorities will inform about any other income that this donor will have. Another modification considered by the reform is in the area of investment in hydrocarbon sectors. Deduction of these investments should have a 10% fixed rate, aligned to the last resolutions of the court, because there were some confusions if the rate was going to be 7 or 25%. But talking about fixed investments in assets for transport, storing, and processing of hydrocarbons. Likewise, the economic package considers as well a deduction for individuals in contributions for retirement plan as long as they are collective. Another aspect in the reform with some fiscal benefits is related to fiscal incentives. As a result of these, the performance of Mexican sportsmen in Olympic Games, tax incentive for sports was created, provided this is contributions to infrastructure projects related to high-performance sport facilities or investments in development, training projects for high performance. sports. Another thing that is considered is technology investment and development. The incentive in the income tax comes back. This is not a new incentive. It was already included in the law in 2008, and now it's been reincorporated. Another incentive considered in the reform for the economic package of 2017 is incentive in electric vehicles to promote alternate energies and reduce pollution emissions. So this is basically the incentives. There are some other benefits for micro companies or micro enterprises. There's an optional regime for companies that are made up only by individuals and that their capital is not exceeding 5,000 pesos. Facilities that they will enjoy is that they can determine their taxable base according to the cash flow. This means standardize how they determine their taxable base in income tax compared to VAT tax. This comes from 2012 from a cash flow base. We also have some changes in the way we determine taxes on this benefit. These companies will not be applied to inflation adjustment. Provisional payments will not be based on a profitability coefficient as companies do. Depreciation, deduction of fixed assets is kept, same with some percentage. So these are basically the most important modifications or reforms in the economic package for 2017. Certainly, we need to analyze a lot for this new taxation scheme for these kind of companies. Now, let's turn to Juan Carlos Hernandez. Juan Carlos, please indicate to us, even when it has not been a law with important fiscal reforms, just tell us, what do we have in 2017 in the area of value-added taxes? We have two important modifications. One of them is related to pre-operation expenses that will not be creditable when they are spent, but up to the moment when the taxpayer generates income. Up to there, they can request these balances in favor. There is also an update period if they have some impact to credit this tax when they request, so they can update them. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos.
And finally, a topic that has been important for Mexico and is of international matters in transfers in related parties. What are the important changes that we can expect in this package? Marco Castillo, please. Thank you, Francisco. Well, especially in 2017, we do not have many changes that will be proposed by legislators. What they tell us is that, as you know, in Article 76, Fraction 9, there's a limit of 13 million for entities that perform activities with foreign parties, related parties, and they need to carry out a transfer price study. So those 13 millions, they want to get rid of them for those companies that adhere to the law of hydrocarbon income that they would not be applied of that limit, and they would need to carry out this transfer price study, because this type of industry at the beginning they generate many investments, and it could be that at the beginning they didn't have earnings. So anyways, the authority wants to control them, and also it highlights that they must preserve all the information in a very detailed manner. This is what they are proposing. And also, as you know, the consultations to the authority in transfer price matters, and they want to update the amounts, but so far are very low. They range from 2,000 to 11,000 pesos, and they're proposing to go from 43,000 to 200,000 because of the consultation of transfer price, especially for transnational companies. Okay, I don't know if you want me to talk about that, even though this was last year, but for 2017, yes, this is what I was going to ask you. This is very important about the statement issued in 2016 about the big multinational groups. What can you tell us about this? Well, since that for 2017, all the companies will be submitting all the information statements that were added for 2016 according to Article 76A, which states that we need to refer to Article 32H of the Fiscal Code of the Federation to see what are our assumptions. Well, mainly the entities of Title II that will have income above 364 million of pesos, they will be obliged to declare this information statements depending on the assumptions. Also, it is mentioned that groups of entities, an optional regime that talks about integrators and integrated, and also all the state-owned companies and entities that resides abroad with a permanent establishment in Mexico. They have to work, they have to prepare three declarations. The first one is the information declaration of related parties, and basically this is a declaration corrected and augmented of Annex 9, which is in force. Also an information declaration local for operations with national related parties, and also an information declaration country by country, and this is done. We will have a very important filter because this talks about 12 billion pesos that as a consolidated revenue in order to declare, and it's going to be very detailed with registries of each one of the related parties with which they operate and the earnings obtained by each one of them. Also, a very important aspect is not complying with declarations will be fines about 150,000 to 200,000 pesos. Thank you very much. This topic must be considered. Well, I think that we're going to have our Q&A session. So I would like to I am Claudio Pote, former accountant of the Ministry of Treasury. I would like to address two questions. First, the concern generated in different sectors in terms of the public indebtedness, the 49 up to 52%. And this is one of the problems that are affecting the Mexican society and the Mexican state. And the second question, what has been done with Panama Papers, where you are standing and there are companies that have appeared in the different headlines locally and globally, and all the 400 companies, among them the Slim companies, Televisa, the companies of the most important financial people of this country, the 400 of Nassau. Thank you very much. Well, we are going to take rounds. Well, first and foremost, the political situation of Mexico, without no doubt, has evolved in fiscal matters. Why? Because we are a country that depends a lot on oil. Our contributions and tax collection was always related to this kind of taxes, the hydrocarbons and the special tax on service and productions. What happens today? We have an economical crisis. As you well said, we have a public indebtedness that is very important, not only at public level, at the government level, but also many investors that have companies in Mexico. I can quote multiple examples where most of the companies that depend of the U.S. production and they have a debt in dollars, they have a strong dispute on the management of their debts. But for fiscal matters, they simplify the payment of income tax. Could be the annual adjustment per inflation. In Mexico, we have to pay income tax because of having debts, unfortunately. But all these criteria are crystallized in the fiscal reform that was changed from 2013 to 2014. So our dependence has a trend to the income tax and other kind of contribution. The control tax was eliminated. The unit rate was eliminated. All these indicators, the forecast of the country, of the Ministry of the Treasury wants to increase tax collection through controls. What are those controls? The tax mailbox, the electronic accounting, among others, like we said before, with electronic audits, and mainly what other factor? To reduce public expenditure, expecting that other structural reforms will attract the foreign investment. So this is one first response. I'm going to give the microphone to Juan Carlos Hernandez so he can explain us the Panama Papers and Nassau topic. What we have, and we know from fiscal authorities that they are going to be audited before the end of Aristoteles Núñez was a commitment that he offered to the public that they will go after those individuals that appear on that list. Well, obviously, if there are investment there and the tax was not paid in Mexico, what they would have paid if generated those revenues here, they will have to be they will be credited, then they will have to pay. The counterparty will go to to defend the one that will need to resolve is the court. Well, as a way of complement, there's a figure issued by the Ministry of the Treasury. I don't remember the figure exactly, but currently there's a tax collection in millions of dollars with respect to those taxpayers that appear in that list, and they were also in a document issued by the Ministry of Treasury as auditing aspects to pay attention on the operations that we have with preferential fiscal regimes. I hope we answered your question. Okay, if you have more questions, I don't know if you want to write them down, and so later on they can be answered in writing. And with this, we thank our fiscal panel, and then we will publish this and post this in all social networks. Thank you very much. Because we have time restrictions, we have a couple of topics before the coffee break, and then we will have our last topic. We have a talk through Skype because the person in Peru is on a highway, so let us continue. Well, we're going to close this, not too close because this is going to be seen during this session, but we will close it with a practical experience of the TPP that is proposed by our next lecturers. The topic is called The Governance and the Productive Chain Analogy with TPP in the state of Guerrero Special Economic Zone. So please, Raimundo Rosas Pérez, Rubén Rafael Alcocer Maicot, and Juan Luis Aldret, please join the podium. So once this is prepared, thank you very much. First and foremost, it's been said that the man is the wolf of the man, and this lies in the world financial world, 1% against 99%. The U.S. says that he has 3 weapons to dominate and control the world. The first one is the currency, the dollar currency. The second is the monetary fund reserve, and the third and the most important one is a strategic basis of defense that they have all over the world. I read a long time ago an Argentinian author that said that in the future, the 2 nations that would dominate the world were China and the U.S. And this coincides with what Herman Kahl and Elvin Toffler, futurologist, the late Toffler said this. And this makes that this coincides that after the Second World War, the distribution of the beaten countries and winners was the socialist conditions that are under change. Alvin Toffler also said that everything was changing except the change, and this coincides with the area, the rapidity of all changes that we are experiencing. In the Second World War, the world was divided. In the last 40 years, it seemed that there was an agreement between the 2 predominant nations of the future, and in the doctrine, the U.S., America was for the Americans. The recent evolution of emerging nations, there was a classification of countries like the BRICS, then the MIST, and then the BRICS. There was China, all the investments in Africa and in America. It seems that so the U.S. suspended those projects and punished several nations. So this is one of the situations that we are experiencing nowadays. Our topic, as Mauricio said, is the governance and productive chain analogy with TPP, regional case of state of Guerrero. So My colleague Ruben Rafael Alcocer, MICOT, will deliver the objectives. The objective of our project is to narrate what the local investment meant in the case of manufacturing a Hyundai buses in the industrial park of Ocotit in the state of Guerrero, in analogy to the recent context of the TPP. The legal harmonization is explained and the aligning that leads to governments and the rule of law. Definition of the TPP. In this definition, in my opinion, almost all the comments made by the lecturers fit in this definition, and those are in definition matters and everything may happen. In every is the trade negotiation that is the most relevant because of its ambition level. The human being, the wolf is the wolf of the man, the fugacity of ideas, everything happens, and the wide range of disciplines, including the high standards established in each one of them. That is, what are the disciplines? All of them. And the number of participating countries of 4 geographical regions: North America, South America, Oceania, and Asia. So in this definition of TPP, we may include all the ideas that occur to us, what may happen, what is going on, what tonight we may define, or the trend that will exist. And like someone said, whoever wins, all the nations that are below, it's going to be very difficult for them to grow. So we need to think of a word or a neologism that is called glocal. What glocal means? Many of you manage this word. So it means to think globally and act locally. This is that it should be that all the nations should do, all the regions and all human beings, to think first in the environment, to define ourselves completely, in this case as nations. What do we want? We have seen, like almost 70 years ago, there was a project of the European Union. If America, Latin America, had wanted to do this project, we would need 100 years to do so. But I feel that someday we need to do this. We must do it. And even though they are in a very difficult situation. This is the 12 countries that currently are in the TPP. But TPP complements and supplements some of the treaties, for example, the Canada, US, and Mexico Treaty. I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Ruben Rafael, so he can continue with this presentation. We do not have too much time. The purpose of this word atlas, presenting both hemispheres, well, traditionally the trade in the British companies and the Indies with America towards Europe. Now, the Asian continent on the left side, and obviously the Atlantic Ocean is in the second plane to give way to the Pacific Ocean. Well, the Ocean Pacific for Mexico has been very relevant since the colonial times, and the port of Acapulco was the start point for the Spanish galleons that arrived to the Philippines with the phrase that Spaniards state that in the Spanish Empire the sun never rose. So in Latin America, from Chile to California, and from there taking advantage of the marine currents at some point in time, and the winds, dominant winds, because of the sailing boats, went through the ocean, Pacific Ocean. Today, in the mouth of the river Balsas, it is thought to place a special economic zone, but the sailing boats, old sailing boats, will no longer move the merchandises. Instead, we have all those big ships that have containers on top, and they move by large cranes. And at the beginning of this event, the engineer explained that the great amount of containers that move in the ocean. So this is relevant because of Lázaro Cárdenas Port that was founded or was formed to give life to steel industry, has waiting lines of ships. The ships cannot go into the port because there are so many loads moving that they cannot go into the port, but they are very deep. So the largest ships that have containers get there, and this is one of the best entry points to Mexico and exit points as well. So there will be in a special economic zone. But what is this? And this is very important to consider. It has to have certain infrastructure features like railroad, port, highways, information technology in real time, 24 hours per day, and so on, because telecommunications are the base of the business, the 365 days a year, 24 hours per day. Well, as a way of example of the contrasts of foreign investment in our country, the municipality, for example, fishery in Nuevo León State, which is a neighboring municipality of this place, and contrasting this, the state of Nuevo León with the state of Guerrero that has almost the same number of inhabitants, a plant of the industrial park of Ocotito. Ocotito, it is a population that belongs to the capital of the state, which is Chilpancingo de los Bravo, Guerrero. So if we compare this plant that has a $3 billion investment, and it was and a specific town was formed with Korean technicians that managed robotics in Mexico, with an industrial plant of manufacturing and assembly plant and labor for trucks, Hyundai trucks, Kia, it is a brand of Hyundai. It is Korean. So even though Korea is not part of the TPP, well, in the meantime, as we said before, that the Ministry of China whispered and asked him, are you going to be into TPP? No, but we will be triangulating inputs. So the Koreans here are going to be part of those companies through the Mexican companies with foreign capital. And this is a concept. But this investment, foreign investment structure in Mexico is repeated in two plants. One in Chiapas that is called Neon Gonday with Ecuadorian capital, and the other one which is located in Querétaro for trucks exclusively. So I think is a clearest example of the contrast of investment, but according to a criteria. What is this criteria? The local criteria. I don't know if I made myself clear. Not thinking about the local criteria of a country. A representative of Dominican Republic said our taxes are total in terms of the country. In Mexico, the law of fiscal coordination distributes, according to the number of inhabitants, the tax collected, and only one part of the budget is exercised in each state. So they have to use the land tax or property tax, a consumption tax, and tourism, etc., to have resources. So from this standpoint, this is the one that we think is relevant. That is, we have this in the law hierarchy. The Mexican laws, as in all laws that have a principle of Roman law or are hierarchical, and the first hierarchy is on the political constitution, but also in the international treaty. So even though we presented this, well, one of the lecturers said that the constitution is above the treaties, in the country they have the same hierarchy. So Mexican citizens are not Mexican anymore, are citizens of the world. And I think that we need to embed this in our minds if we want to make international businesses. Well, in this order of ideas, sometimes they will seem different in terms of legislations, municipalities, or in ejidos. That is a full level of government, so to speak. You have three levels of government established, which is the federation, the state, the municipality. Yes, but be careful. Guerrero has 85% of the territory in ejidos and communities, and they are subject to agrarian law. And this is a chapter, a special chapter in the context of our Mexican Republic, and this is where we have agro-industrial businesses. If we want to buy products like sesame seed in Guerrero, we have to go to those meetings and local meetings. And this is what I can comment about the legal harmonization between state, federation, and municipality.
And obviously, within the international context, the adaptation of local law by the local congresses is relevant, because it may happen that some regulations are not compatible with the legislation. In the particular case of Guerrero, for example, transportation is one of the particular cases, because the regulations are according to the freedom of transportation, freedom of competition, but the law sets forth a political order control because they still have some concessions in transportation concessions. So now let's turn to our conclusions, finishing the transportation area. Due to time constraints, that would be it on my own. I just want to make two comments that I think are relevant of what's happening worldwide. One of the changes to make high-level decisions at government level are based in the number of transnational companies existing in the country, those that manage the monies of the world, having the power. Therefore, transnational companies were subject to the laws of each country in the past. Sadly, now countries have to be subject to the wishes of transnational companies, and this is a strengthening point for decision making. An example of governance which is not in Latin America, it's equality. When the government and the people are together, we have equality and governance. One example in the world was after the World War in Japan, when they had the agreement of what they were going to do. The condition that they requested was one, that workers, the people, should have good acquisition level, purchase level, and this allowed Japan, by means of the purchase level, to trigger economic internal growth. Thing that in Latin America, specifically in Mexico, the minimum wage has been hit, and this has been one of the weapons that capitalism has used to get more power. It's the war of 1 against 99. So now let's finish reading conclusions by Juan Luis. Before anything, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present these conclusions. They are not on the screen, but for me, after working with these great masters, one of the big conclusions could be that no nation that I know may survive without a treaty, without trading their products. The TPP is very important for me when I discovered it and I started to study, because it has opened lots of doors for international trade, and this is very important for me. There was a phrase in the conclusions that was win-win. This exerted a lot of impact on me, because the speaker, for example, of Dominican Republic, when he speaks about his nation figures, many were impressed, because they never thought that a country that seemingly is small had so big importance at continental level, same as Ecuador. So I was highly surprised if you say that the United States is the big one. I think that if Latin America unites, would be 40 or 50% of what the United States is. Just then think about the importance of Latin American countries. Their products are essential not only in the United States but also in Mexico and Europe. That's why Europeans have turned their heads to the continent and make their investments. Also in the case of Asia, as Professor Ruben mentioned, they entered and they have grown. So this is a good, positive consideration on how good it is to invest in these countries. They have the resources, the wealth, and incredible regions. Europe would wish to have this kind of countries, and they are brothers of Mexico because they belong to the same continent. Now, in the case of Venezuela, they have an incredible vision, as Carlos mentioned. They are not giving away. They have a future vision, and they are not getting weaker due to the fact that they have political and economic problems. They prefer to wait a socio-economic change to take place. So, in short words, a country in problems will make it one of the biggest in continental terms. Look at what happened to China. No one thought about China in the past, and now see how the nation is. And see Mexico, it is surrounded by Chinese products, industries, and I think that Latin America should see this and never give up, because I have always said, probably I will not live enough to see my dreams materialized, but my dreams make my life. So that's what each country should do. They should never say, I am feeling bad, or they need to have a positive point of view. Never give up. Always look for economic, political, and social progress, because at the end, the continent is not Argentina or one country. All of us are brothers, and that's why it is important for me, all these treaties. TPP, Mexico has many treaties. So it is important for Mexico to have these relationships. So Mexico will not only grow, but also Latin America. So these are the conclusions for me. So UC&CS is honored to have speakers as you. Thank you for coming and bringing the future to us, the future of Latin America, and this tells about the future you are doing, because this is the future of our nations. I would like to hand out your participation diplomas. This recognition to Ramon Rosas Perez for his participation as speaker in the UC&CS America Governance and Productive Change Analogy with TPP. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to give this recognition to Rubén Rafael Alcócer Maicote for his valuable participation as speaker in the 17th World Congress of UC&CS America, topic governance and productive change, analogy with TPP. Thank you very much, Rubén. Finally, I would like to give this recognition to Juan Luis Altres Chavez for his participation as speaker in the 17th World Congress of UC&CS America, the topic governance and production chain, analogy with TPP.